and welcome. Today, we're diving into a really important topic. How do drugs taken during pregnancy actually affect a developing baby? We're going to break down the science to get a clear picture of the risks, and we're starting with one number that really puts it all into perspective. Here it is, 3%. Now, that's the percentage of all babies born with what's called a major congenital anomaly. And while 3% might not sound like a huge number at first, it really underscores why it's so crucial to understand all the factors that can influence development. So, what exactly is a congenital anomaly? Well, simply put, it's a developmental issue that's there when a baby is born. You've probably heard other terms for it, like birth defects or congenital malformation. They all mean the same thing. And this is going to be the key term for our whole conversation today. All right, so here's our roadmap. First, we'll get a solid handle on what birth defects are. Then we'll look at the different types. After that, we'll dig into the causes, genes versus environment. And that's where we'll really focus on how drugs fit in. And finally, we'll see how experts actually figure out a drug's risk. Let's jump in. Okay, first section. To really get a grip on birth defects, we have to talk a little bit about the science of teratology. It sounds complex, but it's just the field that studies the causes and the how of abnormal development. It's all about figuring out why things sometimes go off track. Now, here's a fact that points to a pretty powerful hidden process. While significant developmental issues might happen in a lot of very early embryos, most of them are spontaneously lost. It's almost like a natural quality control, and it's the reason why that number of babies born with major anomalies is much lower, right around that 3% we just talked about. It turns out not all birth defects are the same. To really understand them, experts have sorted them into three main buckets: malformation, disruption, and deformation. Getting the difference is super important because it helps trace back to the cause. So let's break each one down. First up, we have malformation. This is what you'd call a primary structural defect. The best way to think about it is like this. Imagine there's a mistake in the original architectural blueprint for a building. The error happens right at the very beginning of the process when an organ is first being built. This image shows it perfectly. A neural tube defect is a classic malformation. See how the neural tube, which is destined to become the brain and spinal cord, is supposed to close up completely? Well, if it doesn't do that during those critical early weeks, that's an error in the initial construction plan. Next, we've got disruption. Now, this is totally different. In this case, the blueprint was perfect. Construction was going along just fine. But then, something from the outside came in and interrupted everything, causing damage. The key here is that the initial plan was fine. It was an outside force that caused the problem. A really powerful example of a disruption is something called amniotic band syndrome. Sometimes these fibrous bands can form inside the amniotic sac, and they can wrap around a part of the fetus, like an arm or a leg. This can cut off blood flow and cause serious damage to a structure that was, until that point, developing totally normally. And our third category is deformation. So with the deformation, the structure itself is formed perfectly. No blueprint errors, no disruptions. But after it's formed, it gets pushed or squished out of its normal shape, usually by some kind of mechanical pressure. Think of a perfectly built sculpture getting bent out of shape because the box it's in is too small. Clubfoot is a really common example of a deformation. The foot itself has all the right bones and muscles, all formed correctly, but because of how the baby was positioned in the uterus, there wasn't enough room, and the foot got molded into a different shape. The underlying structure is normal. It's the positioning that caused the issue. Okay, so now that we know the different types of defects, let's get to the million-dollar question. What actually causes them? It turns out the origins can be split into two really big categories. So on one side, you have genetic causes. These are problems that are rooted in the DNA itself, maybe with whole chromosomes or just single genes. But on the other side, you have environmental causes. This is when something from the outside world interferes with development, and those somethings have a very specific name. And that name is teratogen. This is a hugely important word for us today. A teratogen is basically any external agent. It could be a drug, a chemical, or even an infection like a virus that has the potential to cause a birth defect. And that brings us right to the heart of what we're talking about. How exactly do these teratogens, especially drugs, mess with that incredibly complicated dance of development? Well, it turns out there are a few key rules that determine what happens. There are basically three fundamental rules of teratogenesis. First up is timing. Exposure during a critical window, when organs are just starting to form, is way more dangerous. Second is the dose, how much of the substance and for how long, that matters a lot. And third is genetic makeup. The unique genetics of both the mother and the fetus can make them more or less vulnerable. It's this complex mix of all three that determines the outcome.
So, on a cellular level, what are these teratogens actually doing? Well, they can get in there and mess with the most basic processes. They might slow down or even stop cells from multiplying. They could cause too many cells to die off, or they could prevent cells from moving to where they're supposed to go. They can even disrupt how cells talk to each other.
Let's make that a little more concrete. This diagram kind of shows the idea of cell growth. A teratogen might cause less cell growth, which could lead to an organ being too small. Or it could trigger too much programmed cell death, that's called apoptosis, and that could result in entire structures, maybe even parts of a limb not forming at all. Phew! So with all this complexity, how do we actually figure out if a specific drug is safe to take during pregnancy? That brings us to our last section, the nuts and bolts of how risk is assessed.
Yeah, it's a multi-layered process. It usually starts with standardized testing in animals to see if there are any red flags, but it doesn't stop there. Once a drug is out in the world, the evaluation continues by looking at case reports from doctors and by doing these big studies that either look back at past pregnancies or follow new ones going forward. And to make all this information easier to digest, the FDA came up with these pregnancy risk categories. Category A is the gold standard. It means controlled studies in humans have shown no risk. But as you go down the list B, C, and D, the level of uncertainty or even known risk goes up. It's meant to be a quick guide to help doctors and patients weigh the benefits of a drug against its potential risks. So after looking at all the science, the sources really boil it down to one simple, powerful idea. When you're talking about teratogens, prevention is, without a doubt, the best strategy. Just being cautious and informed about any substance, whether it's a prescription, over-the-counter, or things like alcohol or tobacco, is absolutely key during pregnancy. And that leaves us with one final question to think about. If awareness is truly our most powerful tool, then what does that mean for the conversations we have about medication and pregnancy? How can we make those talks between doctors, pharmacists, and expecting parents as clear and as effective as they can possibly be? Definitely something to consider. Thanks so much for joining me.